Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Ask Canada Immigration Lawyer podcast. I'm Evelyn Ackah, and I have the real pleasure today of welcoming my friend and colleague, Sameer Khedekar. He is the founder and managing lawyer of Banyan Law, based in California, where he focuses on U.S. immigration law, especially focused on startups, Fortune 500 companies, and what else do? You do everything. And employee-based
Investors, founders, yeah.
founders, all investors.
Yeah.
So lots of things to talk about. Welcome, Sameer.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I wanted to have you on our podcast because you do a kind of immigration law, obviously, that I don't do as a U.S. attorney, really focused on like Silicon Valley and that whole industry. Can you tell me how you got into this field, like different from just a general immigration lawyer?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
You have to go all the way back to the beginning of your life, but
But actually, the beginning of my life does inform how I started
yeah,
immigration.
tell me.
This is what I tell people. So my mom actually, she was living. My mom and dad were living in LA. After they got married and before I was born. And then my mom got pregnant. She went back to India to have me, which is the opposite of what everyone was trying to do back then. So my mom's kind of quirky, quirky mom, but she was also feeling super alone and she wanted her support system out there. And so I was born in India and I had a green card for when I came back, I had a green card of permanent residency for 30 years. And the government kept messing up my name on my green card. So when I was like 13 or 14, I'd have to go stand in line and like try to convince them to fix it, which is something they should have done, but I feel like I had to convince them. And that was my first exposure to like working with bureaucrats and trying to convince them to do a job they're supposed to do. And I realized I was pretty good at it. I liked it. I saw a bunch of people around me as a kid who seemed like they had, they just needed a lot of help. And it just planted the seed. And fast forward to law school, had no idea what I wanted to do. I graduated law school without a job. I fell into work at a small immigration firm in San Francisco. That's where I learned business immigration, and that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
That's so cool. It's so cool. I can't believe that poor kid having to stand in line, get your name corrected. Why did you wait so long? I mean, this is obviously off topic, but to become a citizen.
Yeah. So, well, it was that's a great question. I'm kind of a natural procrastinator. So that's one thing. Number two, I think I was kind of scared of the immigration process. Which is, you know how it feels. Like now our clients are scared of it. We kind of understand, having gone through it ourselves, like, oh, this is actually not the easiest thing in the world. It's kind of scary. And the unknown, the complexity of it. But when I became a lawyer, an immigration lawyer, that's when I did it. Because that's when I know how to do this now. I understand the process works. So that's when I applied for myself. And back then I was grading the bar exam, the California bar exam. And the officer said, okay, because usually you're supposed to like answer six questions correctly, like civics questions correctly, right? He's like, I'm gonna give you a pass if you give me some tips that I could take back to my buddy who's taking the bar exam right now. And no one believes me, but that actually happened. That kind of stuff never happens anymore. But this is like 2004. That kind of stuff still kind of happened back then, but not nowadays. Like, forget about it.
It's hardcore. Well, no, that's really interesting how you got into this field. You've been doing it for over 17 years. Obviously, like me, it's a passion. There's a purpose. You have a strong why. Tell me kind of what your ideal client looks like. What would that avatar be for you at Banyan Law?
I mean, well, as you know, in kind of business immigration, there's like a few ways we love to help our clients. There's working with companies, right? Because companies kind of need advice on how to hire talented people, how to keep them happy, how to get them permanent residency, how to deal with all the in-betweens and stuff. And so I love doing that, kind of working as a corporate advisor, especially to companies who value the contribution of immigrants, who value the partnership, see us more as a trusted advisor rather than just a vendor or commodity, right? Commoditized services. So that's my kind of corporate client avatar. And then the kind of individual side, right? There are high skilled immigrants, like thousands and thousands, maybe close to 1 million of them now. They end up mostly being Indian nationals just because of the nature of our green card quota. They have the longest lines of any other national in this country. But they also tend to be the most populous, like of all nationalities when it comes to technology workers and the big tech employees. And really, really talented people who are super frustrated with immigration. And it so happens that I just know a lot of them because of where I live. I live here in Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
I'm Indian. Sometimes our families tend to know the same people, and
Yeah.
I've just met a lot of them. I kind of feel their pain. My father was a high skilled immigrant coming into the country. He told me about his difficulties. It seemed very personal to me.
Hmm.
And so finding ways to help this community, which I would think it's in the interest of our country to help them because they contribute so much.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure if the entire country feels that way yet, just based on the laws that we have. And a lot of them end up going to Canada your way,
Yes.
just just because they don't feel the love here in
It
America.
takes
But
so long in the States. Like, let me,
no,
explain to me, because I know that there are different lists for green card eligibility or whatever.
right.
Why is the India nationality list? Is it India and then China in terms of the most
Mhm.
populous, like the longest list?
Yeah, so like, was it back in the 60s or 70s when our like most recent kind of green card quota laws were created?
Mhm.
They were trying to keep things like equally diverse amongst
Yeah,
all nationalities. So what they did was they said, okay, if you're being sponsored for a work-based green card, no more than 7% of any one nationality can take up, this quota. So
mhm.
but in terms of like employment-based green cards and visas and that kind of thing, they're mostly used for technology workers, right? Because
Yes.
that's where our biggest shortfalls have, been, especially since like the 90s, right? In the early
Mhm.
2000s and whatnot. So, and then most of these talented folks come from India and then
Yeah.
to some extent China.
Yep.
And so they just have the most applicants, and because only a certain number of them can come in every year and actually can get to change their status to green cards every year,
Mhm.
their lines are the longest of anybody else, right?
It's
So that's
unbelievable. What
why,
is that
yeah.
called? What is that name for that list or the line, or people call me,
Oh,
what do they call it?
we call it backlog. It's
No, it's
just
a backlog, but there's something about I'm in the green card and there's like this, whatever that backlog is, but there's like a name for it. Anyway, I'm forgetting it, what it is, but
well,
when
whatever
people
it's
call,
called. It's some estimates have it stretching for as long as 150 years now.
oh
So
my, so then, okay, this takes us to your focus. How
yeah,
are you able to help people? If they have H-1B for
yeah,
10 years, how are you able to help them if they're never going to
yeah,
be selected for getting
yeah.
out of the backlog? What can you do for them?
Well, I mean, so they have two concerns, right? They have like a concern about just like the now, like they need a job, they need a visa, otherwise they can't even be here. Their kids are in school, their
Yeah.
family needs support, whatever. So their companies have immigration lawyers that just do the minimum because that's what that system is set up as, to get them a visa and put them in line for that long green card. Because
Yeah.
putting them in line for that long green card ensures that they can continue working for that company, right?
Yeah.
So that's all a company is really going to do, and that's kind of all they should be expected to do.
Hmm.
But then, like, what's the employee to do? Like, the employee feels like all their dreams are they're more than just one job, right?
Yes.
It's a bunch of different things, and they don't feel the freedom. They feel almost chained, right, to this visa
Yeah.
process. They don't feel like they can innovate. They can start companies. They can do different things that'll ultimately be good for the country, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do is there are two ways to petition for your own green card. One of the ways doesn't really help Indians because it's still a long backlog.
Mhm.
In some cases, it does. The other way it really would, which is called the EB1A, Extraordinary Ability
Yep.
Petition. And if you can prove through various ways that you're at the very, very top of your field, then you can be part of the faster green card quota,
Yeah.
where there virtually is no line. And instead of 150 years, it's like 2 years or something, right? So that's a no-brainer, but it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't qualify because they're not at the very top of their field. So what we help them understand is what you can do to get to the top of your field from an EV1 perspective,
Hmm.
which is like also telling them what they can do just to kind of kick butt in their own jobs, right?
Yep.
And really contribute to this country, I think
Hmm.
company. So
That's
so that's
great.
basically it. So it's a little career counseling, but mostly immigration counseling to kind of get permanent residency and freedom from the
Freedom.
constraints, yeah, of the visa process.
Yeah. And then, I'm just thinking about the tech layoffs that are
Hmm.
continuing. What do you tell people on H-1B that have now lost their
Hmm.
jobs, been laid off,
Yeah.
their status in the States is up in the air?
Hmm.
What are their options when this is
Yeah.
happening? It's brutal.
On the one hand, it's like, gosh, there's so many layers to this, right? Because the layoffs themselves were, there was a lot of overhiring happening
Yeah.
during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So the layoffs themselves are just a correction, which is kind of like it's an amoral situation. It's nothing good or bad. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But what stinks is like the Indian nationals who are affected, like they should have had green cards years ago. If we had a sensible green card, they would not have been affected from like, I have to leave my country after, and they consider this to be their country, by the way.
Of
After
course.
like 10 years of living here, my kids are like 14, they're in high school or whatever it is. That's the problem. So there's a mad rush to find a job to keep the chain of the visas in continuity going, right? And if you're on the H-1B, which is the most common visa, you have 2 months, 60 days to find a job. What a lot of companies are doing, to their credit, and they're being public about this, is that they're saying they'll do whatever they can to help employees on visas this year, which I've never heard a company say before. Now that companies like Coinbase, Salesforce, others, Meta are making public pronouncements. So that's kind of an improvement, right?
Yeah.
And what they're doing kind of behind the scenes is that they're keeping their employees in unproductive employee status. So rather than just like saying, okay, you're out, here's your severance, they're kind of like, they're giving them paychecks and they're technically employees on payroll, still have access to their HR information system and whatnot. And so it's a gray area as to whether or not that counts as employment. The government probably is not going to realize that what's happening. And so they'll, because when you get a new job, right, you have to show that you've been maintaining your status, right? And so you have to provide paychecks from your last job. And so that's what the companies are giving them. They're giving them paychecks.
Good for them.
So hopefully that works. It's still a little risky because the letter of the law is like, when you stop working for the company, that's the end.
Yeah, I remember that happened in Canada around when the oil boom and financial boom in 2008, or the bust, I should say, and everybody was being laid off. And I was talking to employers every day, and I just said, we need to find a fair way of managing this. You don't want to be the employer that just cuts everybody off and dumps them, and then 2 years later you're trying to get them back. That is not going to work for your reputation. So I think it's really good that what they're doing is trying to be good employers even on the way out, and I don't think there's anything
it's not really fair.
This.
I also feel for companies too, because it's like, it's not their fault. Like, if you're a US citizen, like, okay, you're laid off, but you know what, you have to find a job, but you don't have to leave the country, right? But it's the visa system that is flawed. It's the system that the government has created and hasn't changed since before the invention of the internet, which is basically the last time all these rules were made, right? So that's the problem. Do
you see some of them maybe starting their own businesses? Like, it's kind of like, well, I've got all this expertise. I've worked for 12 years in the US and I'm a high level engineer or whatever. I'm going to turn that and produce my own company. And are they able to do that from the H-1B perspective, to move?
They are. It's in theory they are. I do a lot of counseling on starting your own company on an H-1B, which is definitely possible. But it requires certain steps to be in place. And if those steps weren't in place when you were laid off, it's like hard to get them in place within that 60-day period, right?
I hear you.
They just need the job to kind of get stability. So hopefully there are people who have just been kind of, laying the groundwork for it for months and months and months. And for those people, they're in a better position to start their own company on their own H-1B. So it is in theory possible.
It's interesting. So, I mean, what we're hearing and seeing now more is people are calling, their companies are saying, we don't need them in the US, but we need them in the Canadian location of our global whatever tech company. And so if they usually have a branch or a subsidiary in Canada anyway, so then you can just transfer them to Canada from the Canadian intercompany, similar. And then
anyone
here.
who Well, anyone who now, like, so we're recording this in February, right? 2023, and in a couple of weeks is our H-1B lottery, right? For anybody who has never had an H-1B before, they have to go to the lottery to get one. It's like a 20% chance of getting one every year, which is crazy. And we've seen so many people who, if they're not able to get into the lottery, their employers are totally willing to place them in Canada. And so companies that have larger departments, as you know, will
Yeah.
have offices in Canada, and they can kind of facilitate the paperwork.
Yeah.
But it's the companies that are smaller, like the kind of small, medium-sized businesses, startups, and
Mhm.
whatnot. They don't know how to do that, and so
Yeah.
they definitely could use the advice on setting up, the
Yeah.
systems in Canada and getting the visas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
As a means to be in the same time zone, right, as the
Totally.
U.S.
It
It's
makes, we've been
yeah,
doing it for a few years at least,
yeah,
where sometimes we'll just incorporate for them, set up the sub or the branch, obviously with good tax advice. They
hmm
need that. I always say tax drives immigration when it's at the corporate level, and
hmm
even for the individual. And then we just transfer them. And
hmm
literally within 2.5 years, they can be permanent residents. Like that's the crazy thing that just between Canada and the US, you can become a permanent resident in
and
less
then
than 3 years.
and then if you can become a permanent resident in less than 3, how long does it take to become a citizen at that point?
You have to be about, it's about 2.5 years because they count some of the time you're working. Strictly speaking, it's 3 years physically present in a 4-year
Right,
term. But you
right.
count, maybe it's about 2.5 years because you worked as well. So then they become citizens, and then yeah, they can even move back, or they can even be permanent residents, and then they can transfer back as L1s, not NAFTA,
Yeah,
or wait till they're NAFTA eligible and do that. But and then apply for green card, and they're no longer an Indian
yeah.
citizen or a Chinese citizen, or they're an actual Canadian citizen. It makes it much easier.
It makes it much easier. They can spend that time building their profile that we talked about for the EB1 if they wanted to
Mhm.
come back here eventually.
Yeah.
If they're a Canadian citizen, then I mean, forget about NAFTA. I mean, they can get the TN visa if they want to,
Mhm.
but if they want the H-1B, they don't have to get visa stamps anymore. So that's
I
Canadians are the only country that where if you're a citizen of that country, you don't have to get visa stamps in your passport as permission to enter the U.S., even if you
Mhm.
have the work permit approved, right?
Yeah.
And the visa stamping process has been a complete nightmare since COVID,
Wow.
especially like in India and other countries. It's been like the waits are 1 or 2 years just to get
Are
visa
you
stamps.
kidding? So
People aren't able to travel.
I read your
Yeah.
blog about the State Department plans pilot for domestic visa renewal. Is that related to this?
Well, this is why, right? So what's
Okay.
happening is I couldn't believe when I heard this. 'Cause I'm like, oh my God, the government saw a problem and they actually are suggesting a sensible solution to it. What's going on here? Um,
Hey, they're
uh,
listening in. Be careful.
that's
And you're
I'm way past
amazing.
that. This has been happening for years, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, if you're an Indian national, you have to get a visa stamp, usually at a U.S. consulate or embassy in India. If you want to travel, right? So you want to see your family, father is ill or whatever,
Yeah.
you can go, but in order to come back, you have to get the visa stamps. But since COVID, like the waits are like a year and a half or something like
Mhm.
crazy like that. So no one can travel or they're stuck or whatever it is. And so I think the government recognized that they're just not able to, process these very quickly, that their budget shortfalls and
Mhm.
other considerations stemming from like the kind of the long reach of the pandemic. So they are kind of reinstating this program, which they used to do prior to 2004,
Oh.
where they would actually issue you visa stamps here in the US. You don't need to travel. The reason they did the whole like you have to go abroad is really because of 9/11. They felt so much pressure to verify that you're not a security threat,
Yeah.
right? And they felt like the people that were most able to do that were the diplomats and the people who are on the ground in that specific country. So that's why they
Mhm.
wanted you to go back to your country and get a visa and come back. But I
Crazy.
guess it's a testament to how maybe security is not so much of a threat anymore, which is kind of a positive.
Yeah, but I also think it's the backlog. I mean, even getting an
Yeah,
e-visa appointment at a US embassy consulate in Canada, it's just months and months and months and months. So,
yeah,
it just, I don't know when that backlog is going to improve for sure. And then the other
yeah.
thing I wanted to chat about is the increase in fees coming up. Do you think it's likely gonna happen? I mean, some of these are like 100%
Yeah,
or more increase in L's and H's and E's and I-120. Like, I'm just shocked how much they're asking for now.
I know. And like like it's like, can you imagine any other industry? It's like our service has gotten so much worse that we need to increase our fees. Like, can you imagine us trying to get away with that? But that's how it works with
That's
the
how it
government,
works.
and because
That's
they're
how it works.
the world's largest monopoly, right?
Do
So,
you think it's
uh,
gonna go through? I mean, I'm sure.
yeah, they're
Okay.
going through the rulemaking process right now.
Okay.
So they're going through the process that they're receiving the kind of like the comments as required from the public, and then they'll do it. Now, the only way it's not going to go through, and the way that it didn't go through during the Trump administration, is if they get sued.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the basis of this suit would be, because they're following all the proper steps, whereas in the Trump administration, they kind of they never followed the right steps, so they would get called on it.
They get sued all the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is so different. I think it's going to go
I
through.
know.
It's a money grab. I mean, the other day, interestingly, like I do the port of entry L's, and we had an executive getting his L, and it was an extension, but really not, because in Canada, they don't treat them at the ports like an extension. It's just a brand new one. And the fee has been paid, but then they asked for the fraud prevention fee again. And I had never had that happen before, where they had to do that again. So it was like just another 500 here and another 1,000 there. And, I just thought, this poor guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is the new world. So is there anything, Sameer, in your practice right now that is the biggest, latest thing that people can contact you at Banyan Law specifically for, that you're really kind of busy focused on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, especially for those that are in Canada, right, who are there because the U.S. immigration process wasn't working for you, but maybe at some point later you want to come back. It's a EB1 coaching, right?
Okay.
It's like getting you ready to petition for your own green card. And the little note that if you're located out of the U.S. internationally, your applications will also get, there's 2 offices that do these in the U.S. One's in Nebraska, one's in Texas.
Yeah.
And your application will get routed to Texas, which is by a few degrees easier than the other one. They're both hard, but but the other one's like a nightmare. But the Texas one is a little easier. It's it's one of those things. It's another carrot to incentivize you.
For people coming back. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is really great, Sameer. I really appreciate you joining us on my podcast. And I want everyone to know to reach out to you at Banyan Law. If you have any U.S. immigration questions related to tech startups and entrepreneur and corporate immigration. And I thank you very much. Take good care.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Thanks,
always a pleasure
Sameer.
talking immigration with you.
Oh, yes. You too. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
1 second.